World leaders from nearly 24 countries met in Washington over the weekend to discuss plans to increase regulation of international financial activity. They acknowledged that a failure of market oversight in countries like the United States had precipitated the financial crisis. Meanwhile, here at home, it's been a month into the Bush administration's more than $700 billion bank bailout. Last week, Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson outlined a new bailout strategy intended to boost consumer borrowing and promote financing for companies that give out loans. President-elect Obama's transition team is reportedly working on improving the management of the bailout come January 20th. But that's 2 months away. And according to the Washington Post, with $290 billion already committed, the Bush administration has taken no action to fill congressionally mandated independent positions to oversee how the bailout is used. According to Naomi Klein's latest article in The Nation, quote, "The more details emerge, the clearer it becomes that Washington's handling of the Wall Street bailout is not merely incompetent, it is borderline criminal." The article is called "In Praise of Iraqi Transition." Naomi Klein, investigative journalist, author of The Shock Doctrine, joins us now from Toronto, Canada. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Naomi.
Thanks so much, Amy.
Criminal? Explain.
Well, there's a few elements now that are being described as illegal that we're finding out. First of all, the equity deals that were negotiated with the largest banks and also some smaller banks representing $250 billion worth of the bailout money. This is the deal to inject equity into the banks, to inject capital into the banks in exchange for equity. The idea was to address the so-called credit crunch, to get banks lending again. The legislation that enabled this, the idea was quite explicit that it had to encourage lending. Barney Frank, who is one of the architects of that legislation, has said that it violates the act if the money is not going to that purpose and is instead going to bonuses, it is instead going to dividends, going to salaries, going to mergers. He said that violates the acts, i.e. it's illegal. But what we know is that it's going precisely to those purposes. It is going to bonuses, it is going to shareholders, and it is not going to lending. The banks have been quite explicit about this. Citibank has talked about using the money to buy other banks. Then there's other aspects of this that are borderline illegal. We've found out that in the midst of the crisis, the Treasury Department pushed through a tax windfall for the banks. A piece of legislation that allows the banks to save a huge amount of money when they merge with each other. And the estimate is that this represents a loss of $140 billion worth of tax revenue for the U.S. government. Many tax attorneys who were interviewed by the Washington Post said that they felt that the way in which the Treasury Department went about this, by unilaterally changing the tax code, was illegal, that this had to be this had to include Congress. Congress only found out about it after the fact. There's another piece of this puzzle that is also borderline illegal, which is that in addition to the $700 billion that we are discussing, the $700 billion bailout, there's another $2 trillion that's been handed out by the Federal Reserve in emergency loans to financial institutions, to banks. But actually, we don't really know who they're handing the money out to because apparently it's a secret. They could be handing it out to a range of other corporations. I think they are, but they're saying that they won't disclose who has received these taxpayer loans. Because it could cause a run on the banks. It could cause the market to lose confidence in the institutions that have taken these loans. That once again, that represents an additional $2 trillion. The other thing that the Fed won't disclose is what they have accepted as collateral in exchange for these loans. This is a really key point because, of course, at the heart of the financial crisis are these so-called distressed assets. The value of these assets is enormously controversial. They may be worth very little. So if the Fed has accepted distressed assets as collateral in exchange for these loans, there's a very good chance that taxpayers aren't going to be getting this money back. So Bloomberg News has launched launched a lawsuit in federal court to find out who has received the loans and what has been accepted as collateral, because they believe that this lack of transparency is illegal. So that's why we're calling this the trillion-dollar crime scene, or the multi-trillion-dollar crime scene. And they're really challenging lawmakers to call them out. The Treasury is, I think Amy, the last time I was on Democracy Now!, we were talking about Henry Paulson's original 3-page proposal, the $700 trillion stick-up, where he basically said, give me $700 trillion, don't ask any questions, I can never be challenged by any arm of government or any court of law. Now, that aspect of the bailout was supposedly dealt with, and we were all reassured that there was going to be transparency, accountability, legality, but now we're finding out that, in fact, Henry Paulson has achieved his original goal by stealth, because there is no accountability, and lawmakers are very hesitant to challenge this because they're afraid of causing a run on the banks, of causing more market instability. So essentially what the Bush administration has done is said, we dare you to challenge us and be responsible for the Great Depression. And the Democrats, not known for their firm spines, have so far failed to challenge them in anything other than rhetoric.
And what's very interesting about this, of course, is I talked to you before the election, but now the election is over and the Democrats are not in a weaker position, but in a far more powerful position, and they are meeting this week.
Right, and they have a lot of leeway in which to act on this. If Barney Frank means what he says, that this violates the act, then of course they can challenge the deals that have already been signed, these terrible equity deals that are so much worse than what Gordon Brown negotiated in Britain. I mean, let's remember, Gordon Brown got voting rights at the banks that they bailed out, seats on the boards, 12% dividends for UK taxpayers, as opposed to the 5% negotiated in the US, and no voting rights and no seats on the board. Other thing Gordon Brown did is he got it in writing that the banks had to start lending, as opposed to Henry Paulson, who didn't get it in writing, and the banks are not lending. So there is room to move, but the logic that has really gripped lawmakers is that they can't rock the boat, and we hear this across the board, really, in the talk of who to appoint as Treasury Secretary, how to approach economic policy in this period. We hear all these phrases, continuity, smooth transition, and really that's code for more of the same, because what the market wants is for there not to be tough regulation, is for the free money to keep flowing. What will upset the market, what will create a rocky transition, is if it's clear that there's a new sheriff in town, that they're going to have to follow the law, that they're going to cut off all of this corporate welfare, there's going to be real accountability, real conditions attached to the money. You know what? The market really doesn't want that. Unfortunately, for the market, voters have just voted for change. They voted for a candidate who really turned the election into a referendum on this economic policy of rampant deregulation. So you've really got a problem here. How do you reconcile the market's desire for status quo with the voters' demand for real change? There is no way to do that without a few bumps along the way. And I'm quite concerned that what we're seeing from Obama's team is an accepting of this logic that they need to give the market what it wants, which is continuity, smooth transition, which is really just code for more of the same. And when you hear names like Larry Summers being bandied about for Treasury Secretary, that's feeding the market exactly what it wants, which is more of the same.
Naomi Klein, I wanted to go more to these, what you're calling borderline criminal deals. The Washington Post revealing as part of the bailout, lawmakers changed tax code section 382, which limits the kinds of tax shelters companies can use during corporate mergers, created to stop companies who avoid paying taxes by acquiring shell companies valued by the losses on their stocks. And then going on in the piece, it says congressional aides admitted lawmakers agreed to keep the change hidden to avoid public outrage. Staffers with Senate Finance Committee Chair Max Baucus, a Democrat, reportedly asked that an administration briefing on the tax code change be kept secret. One congressional aide said, "We're all nervous about saying this was illegal because of our fears about the marketplace. To the extent we want to try to publicly stop this, we're going to be gumming up some important deals."